Let's go, smokes. Hail and welcome. Today's video is a long time coming. It's like a year in the making at this point. I am going to be completely overanalyzing season 1 of the Trailer Park Boys, and we'll see how long this brief look lasts. I first got introduced to Trailer Park Boys through the Big Dirty movie, and I absolutely loved it, and that obviously kickstarted me into watching the show, and I've been obsessed with it ever since. The basic show premise, in case you were unfamiliar, is it's a mockumentary style piece that follows around the criminals instead of the police. We follow two best friends, Ricky and Julian, as they get out of jail and try to re-assimilate at the trailer park where they live and grew up. We meet the cast of characters surrounding them, and they're all big personalities. I think the best way to start with this first season is to kind of introduce you to some notable cast and then talk about some notable episodes, and I'll also tell you some of my favourite episodes as well, and then you will have a good idea of what this first season's themes and focuses are. We will start with Julian, who is arguably the protagonist of this first season. Julian is muscular and he's money oriented. He's always got a get rich quick scheme. He's always thinking about how what they are doing can benefit him in some way, and this plays into his character a lot. One of my favourite things about Julian is that he always has a drink of rum in his hand. This becomes a running gag throughout the series. We see him in completely inappropriate places with this drink all the time. Then later on, we even see him getting out of jail with the drink somehow. Eventually, it gets to the point where he's coming out of car wrecks with a full glass of rum, which I think is hilarious. Obviously, this speaks to a more serious, overarching drinking problem, but that's not something that we're going to get into today. Julian thinks he's better than his best friend Ricky. He thinks he's smarter than him. He thinks he's more goal-oriented and driven than him, and he probably thinks he's better looking than him, and I think society mostly agrees with him on these points. Julian blames Ricky for the two of them ending up in jail. We don't exactly ever find out, based on just this season, what happened to get them in jail, but based on what happens, we come to find out that maybe it's not exactly the way that Julian tells it, right? See here that Julian's got a little bit of a superiority complex, right? Okay, he thinks he's better than Ricky, but he also thinks he's better than the trailer park. In this first season, we see that he returns and immediately starts trying to leave, to get out of there, cut all his losses, and start a new life, hopefully where he can make a lot more money. However, Julian can't leave the park because as a result of going to jail, he's got outstanding lot fees that need to be paid, and he's not got a job. We kind of get the feeling that Julian's never really had a job. He's not that kind of guy. It's this superiority complex again, right? He thinks he's better than people who have to work. He's too smart to have to work, right? So he goes out and does these illegal things to try and cheat the system and get a lot of money quick and easy, and it just doesn't work out for him. So we kind of see that it's Julian's own failures that make him unable to progress in life, even though he blames everybody else and his environment for the way that things are going for him right now. One of the big parts of Julian's personality is that he's very selfish, but he's also very manipulative, okay? And he doesn't like people to know how selfish he is. Everything that Julian does, he has some ulterior motive that ultimately benefits him. He will do nice things to build up his credibility and to make people think he's this nice guy, but later down the line you will find out that this nice thing has made him some money, or, you know, just benefited him in some way, like he's gotten somewhere to live out of it, or an investment somewhere in something. We see this in the way that in episode 2, Julian helps Ricky with his love interest, Lucy, but only because Julian wants to get Lucy off his own back, because that's who Lucy's really interested in. Julian doesn't have time for Lucy because Julian thinks he deserves girls better than the ones from the trailer park, you know, like some elusive a woman who's on like a higher tier than these other women around him, which is a very misogynistic way to think, I must say. Julian is a very stoic guy, and I think that he's a very mysterious character in these early seasons, despite being the protagonist. And it's very important for him to have these small humanizing moments to make him likable in these early seasons, because otherwise I think his selfishness and his manipulations would make him a highly unlikable character. These humanizing moments are things like his relationship with Mrs. Peterson in episode 4, this old lady who wants somebody to dote on, and you know, despite the fact that she is doting on him, he's there for her and she's benefiting from it as well. So it's kind of backwards wholesome in a way, and that's a phrase that you're going to hear me say a lot, backwards wholesome, and I don't really know how to describe it to you. But it's like, if you saw what was happening in any other context, it wouldn't be wholesome. Here's Julian letting this older woman buy him things because she thinks of him as this like surrogate grandson because she's lonely, right? And you might see that as a guy taking advantage of an older woman. But in the context of the show, with the warmth that we feel towards these characters, it becomes a wholesome moment. And that's backwards wholesome. Another humanizing moment for Julian is in the finale, and it's one of those more genuine moments that we see from him where there isn't a really clear ulterior motive that we, the audience, can understand. And it's one of those moments that makes us question, oh, does Julian have a moral code somewhere underneath all these layers of wanting to be rich and muscular and sexy? But I will save my talk about the finale for later on. Important thing to note while this is the first season and while this is the first time I will be talking about Julian is that I will heap a lot of criticism on him as these analyses go ahead, okay? And I want you to know that I don't dislike Julian as a character or as a person, if you understand what I mean by that. I just understand that he is a deeply flawed individual, and I really like to dive into that part of his personality and, you know, pick apart what makes him him. The really interesting question of Julian's character in these early seasons for me is if he is doing good things for selfish reasons, does it really matter what his reasons are if he is doing good things? Okay, it's this entire moral dilemma and this philosophical debate that we could have for days and days, okay? But I just want you to sit and think on it, okay? Think about when YouTubers go and give food to homeless guys, but they film it for their YouTube channel for clout, okay? It's the same kind of thing. The homeless guy still got to eat. Right. Next, we're gonna move on to Ricky. I love Ricky. I love Ricky LaFleur, okay? And you're gonna learn about that, and I'm not gonna shut up about it for as long as these videos go on, so get used to it, essentially. Ricky is dumb, okay? We're not going to deny it, we're not going to skirt around it. He is a stupid man, but he also has a really big heart. That's what we love about him. Ricky is a little bit juvenile. There's a lot of times in these early seasons, and then it comes back in the later seasons, where he's put on the same level as the kids around the park, and I think that that in itself is a really sweet dynamic that we will get into another time. For now, know that he is passionate, but it's in this unconventional way. Like, he's really loyal to his family and friends, but he just sees the world in a different way than everyone else, and so he shows this loyalty and this compassion and passion in a odd way, to say the least. Ricky is fun-loving, and he is perfectly willing to get along with his life as it is and not chase these impossible dreams of getting rich and getting out of the trailer park that Julian is so obsessed with. Ricky is also under the impression that Julian is a lot smarter than him, and so I think in a way he kind of looks up to Julian and defers to him because he believes that Julian's the man with the plan, right? He knows what's best for the pair of them. And that's how Ricky usually ends up tied up in Julian's schemes. You will notice, however, if you were watching the series closely as I was, that usually Julian's big ideas come from you know, Ricky's cute little clever life hacks that he comes up with. It's possible that without Ricky, Julian would never come up with any of his ideas. There are some episodes in the middle of the season that explore Ricky's anger and impulse control issues, which will become themes later on in the seasons, but for now, is mostly an excuse for physical comedy, which is not a bad thing in any way. Some of my favourite parts of the entire series are Ricky's fights with Randy and, you know, just him getting frustrated with random inanimate objects and throwing them through windows and shit like that. In fact, the physical comedy of Trailer Park Boys is one of my favourite parts of it, but I will get into that later. We're talking about Ricky right now, and, you know, I don't need an excuse to talk about Ricky. The central question of Ricky's character, I think, is a really fun and philosophical one, okay? And that is living in your car and growing weed being successful? And you might have an immediate answer to that, but I would ask you to button it for a minute and think, okay? Socrates once said... Oh, I can't believe I'm doing this. Okay, Socrates once said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And a lot of people around the trailer park view Ricky in this way, okay? He's stupid and he doesn't have any aspirations to go any further in life. He's perfectly content living in his car and growing weed and not making any real money or having any real plans. Ricky does not see his life this way, okay? He thinks it's perfectly fine to live in the car, at least he has somewhere to live, and he thinks it's fine to grow weed because at least he makes money from it. He has his own set of morals that we're not going to get into too deeply right now. But basically what I'm trying to say is, from an outside perspective, it could seem that Ricky is living the unexamined life. However, Ricky does, in his own way, examine his life, okay? I think is it in season 2? I think it is, right? That he goes on to try and get his grade 10 that he never got before, which is like, I don't know about Canadian grading systems, but like it's high school somewhere, right? All the lines that really make me think in the earlier seasons are said by Ricky, because he just says whatever comes to his mind, and sometimes it's a load of nonsense, but sometimes there is a thought behind this nonsense that is actually really poignant. I would like to now bring up another Socrates quote, okay? You know, Socrates said that basically the wisest man, okay, is the guy who admits that he knows nothing. And Ricky is nothing but not humble. Okay, Ricky admits that he's not the smartest guy. In one of the episodes, his love interest Lucy asks him, "You have no idea how stupid you are, do you?" And he responds, "Well, actually, yes, I do." So you can't tell me it wasn't intentional that Ricky was Socrates in these seasons. I don't know. I'm not here to tell you how to think. I'm just here to tell you where to start. That was so... oh my god, that was horrendous. He goes about learning in every possible way he can. It's not his fault that he doesn't know about a lot of the ways that you can get learned. He's not good at book learning, alright? It's just not his thing. So he's like self-smarted, okay? Ricky's existence is really frustrating for a lot of people in the park, but he's like possibly the happiest character out of a lot of them, despite his aforementioned anger issues. He does really bring up this philosophical debate of like, are you a happy idiot or a fucking depressed genius? Oh god. Right, maybe I should stop talking about Ricky for a minute. It's been like 10 minutes. Basically know that I love Ricky. He's a very attractive man. You're going to be hearing a lot about him and the philosophy of the idiots in these series breakdowns. Both Ricky and Julian are respected around the park in their own right as leaders, but Julian in these earlier seasons is definitely Ricky's leader in a lot of ways, as much as Ricky himself might not realise it. They're both well-liked guys around the park, and, you know, there are protagonists, despite the fact that they are criminals, and so we need some antagonists. And that brings us to Mr. Jim Lahey and Randy. Okay, Mr. Lahey is the trailer park supervisor, an ex-cop with drinking problems, currently on the wagon as of this season anyway. Randy is like his assistant, but there's like hints that something else is going on because Randy's this younger guy who runs around without a shirt on, following all Mr. Lahey's orders. There's this weird power dynamic between them that you feel like Mr. Lahey enjoys way too much because he misses being a cop, okay? And this isn't something that's explored too deeply in this first season, but it is mentioned, and so I thought I would also mention it here because it does play into his power dynamic with Randy. And although this first season does focus mostly on the boys and their relationship, we will be getting a lot into Lahey and Randy because I absolutely adore the pair of them. Although, controversially, I did not used to like Mr. Lahey. Like, I used to genuinely just hate him. Not like that I wanted him out of the show, but just like I saw him as a complete antagonist, and like now I understand that him and Randy are just these minor antagonists within the park who are more of like a hindrance to the boys as opposed to an all-out threat. But we'll see the way that their relationship with Lahey and Randy develops as the show goes on. For now, know that in this first season, Lahey and Randy are just kind of worried about the fact that the boys are back and that they're going to start causing trouble again. And, you know, as we can see as the season goes on, they were right to think this way. Probably the most noticeable thing about Mr. Lahey that we should get out of the way right now is his shitisms. Lots of philosophical quotes, well-known phrases, and, you know, just general slanguage. You know, he replaces the words within it with shit, and it makes for a lot of iconic moments and quotable moments and just iconic lines. I will, yes, be mentioning a lot of the shitisms as we go through the season. He doesn't really do shitisms when he's sober, so he's a little bit boring this season. You might notice my laissez-faire attitude toward alcohol as far as this review goes, but I'll get into the more serious aspects of the whole drinking thing with Trailer Park Boys in a later season when everyone's a bit more invested. The last noticeable character I'll talk about for this season is Lucy, who I've mentioned before is Ricky's love interest. Lucy is a little bit like Julian in that she thinks she deserves better, but she just thinks she deserves better than Rick. She's actually quite happy living in the trailer park. Actually, her friend's influence that makes her think she deserves better than Ricky and that he should be giving her more than he is. There's this whole debate about, like, is she wrong? Because, you know, the two of them have got a young child together, Trinity, and as Trinity's father, maybe Ricky should be aiming to do more than live in his car and grow weed. If it is a viable way that he has provided for this family before, can we really blame him for wanting to do it again when it is so easy and it keeps him out of trouble? I think that Lucy is hated quite widely throughout the fandom from what I've seen, and I don't really blame them. And it's weird because I love Ricky so much, and so you would think that a woman who treats him as Lucy does, like obviously in this season we see that she's going after Julian despite having a kid with Ricky and them two being best friends, right? So we see that she's not really got a respect for Ricky like you should have for the father of your child, right? And like he very clearly has for her just in the way that they interact. It's weird that I love Ricky so much and she treats him like this, and yet I kind of love Lucy. I think I'm not gonna say she's a feminist icon, I'm not gonna say it, but she's not quite, like, any woman who's out there doing what she wants to do is a feminist icon, okay? Like, let's just get it out of the way right now. But, like, Lucy is, like, so unapologetically herself that I can't help but like her. And I think that it is the fact that you see the other characters influencing the way that she treats Ricky. When they're on their own and they actually interact one-on-one without any outside influence, you can really see why the two of them are together, why they have a child together, and why I think that they should ultimately end up together in the end. But that is not something that we're going to be talking about this season. Just know that Lucy exists, okay? And that she doesn't necessarily want to be with Ricky, but the season does end with the wedding, so take that as you will. Notable episode from this season is obviously the first episode. The two boys come out of jail, they go back to the park, they reintegrate. This first episode is like a little microcosm of the series as a whole because we see an outside threat come to the park in Cyrus, who, you know, is an iconic character and one that comes back over the course of the season, so that by the end of it he almost feels like one of the guys instead of an outside threat. But at this point, you know, he's a good place to start. He's a little bit ridiculous. He feels a little bit like a schoolyard bully in his leather jacket. This is a common theme though, is we see that someone from outside the park comes in to try and like infiltrate it or change things around the park. This is a big part of the philosophy of Trailer Park Boys, right? It's this big us versus them thing. Inside the trailer park is its own community and its own little place with its own little laws, okay? And everybody kind of looks out for each other. And it's this that makes Lahey a little bit of an antagonist, right? Because he wants the boys out of the park and he's not working within the little community that they've got going there. He's trying to oust them from it, right? Cyrus has come in and he's like moved into Julian's empty trailer and like he's bullying everyone around the park and waving his gun around and stuff. The boys come in and everybody wants Julian to stand up to him, but obviously Julian's only just got out of jail. He doesn't want to get in trouble. A good indicator of how the rest of the series are going to go, because like the rest of the park rallies around Ricky and Julian to go against Cyrus, and even Randy takes Julian aside at one point, I'm pretty sure, and says that he doesn't want to call the police in about this. He doesn't want to get Julian in trouble. He doesn't want to have all, you know, the hassle of the police being around. There's this community in the park that wants to solve things without outside influence, and that's also one of my favorite things about the series, is that you really get a sense of the park as like this little found family, and you know I love a found family. The ending of the episode is really iconic as well, and it sets up this precedent of backwards wholesome that I was talking about earlier. The entire episode, Julian and Ricky have been at odds, and they've been saying they're not going to talk to each other anymore because they blame each other for getting each other put in jail. But at the end of the episode, Ricky still hasn't got anywhere to sleep. Lucy's thrown him out. My boy's just got nowhere to go, okay? And Julian is back in his trailer where he didn't want to be, I remind you. He wanted to move out of the park completely. So he's stuck back at square one from his perspective, okay? And Ricky comes knocking and he says, listen, can I sleep in your car for a couple of nights? Julian, you know, originally says no, but then in the end he goes out and he gives Ricky some vodka and some cigs and some bologna, I think, and lets him sleep in the car. And I'm pretty sure Ricky's still sleeping in that car to this day. So that's true friendship for you. It's this thing I say again, like if you were witnessing that in real life, like you saw this guy sleeping on this other guy's porch, and then the other guy comes out, passes him some vodka and a stick of bologna and lets him sleep in his car, you'd be like, what the fuck is going on over there? But in the context of the show, even in this first episode, it's this heartwarming, wholesome moment between friends where they've like rekindled their relationship or whatever. It's this backwards wholesomeness, this ridiculousness that I really love about these early seasons, and that I feel like really fell off the wagon in later seasons. But we'll get to that when we get to it. My personal favourite episode from this season is episode 5, which is the episode where Julian is trying to convince Ricky to propose to Lucy, and to do this he tells him that everybody thinks he's gay because he hasn't done it yet. And instead of being offended by like the thought of everybody thinking he's gay like Julian wanted him to, Ricky starts questioning whether or not he actually is gay. It does drive the plot in a lot of ways, and it's got a lot of iconic moments. My favourite thing about it is that, if you don't know, these two guys, John Paul Tremblay and Rob Wells, they made this short film called One Last Shot, which was about this guy who was trying to admit to his best friend that he was in love with him and he couldn't do it, so he just kept like extending the night and extending the night. This episode feels like a little callback to that in a way. One of my favourite lines in the episode is, and it's these background moments, because remember this is like a mockumentary, okay? So like as they're walking into a scene, Ricky's saying, well, if I'm gay then you're definitely gay because we're either both gay or neither of us are gay. Well, the fandom loves that one. Bubbles talks about Plato in this episode, which I love. I love it when they like lean heavy into the fact that this is a philosophical show, okay? An educational show. He talks about the noble lie. Sometimes we have to lie to people for the greater good, right? Essentially, is what the noble lie is. So that's why they tell the lie to Ricky about people thinking he's gay, and then they also lie to Lucy and tell her that Ricky is planning on proposing. And they know that, you know, it's good that those two end up together in the end, but it's not a good thing to lie. Yet more philosophy in my Trailer Park Boys episode, and you're trying to tell me this isn't an educational show? Put it on after school. Some more iconic moments when they break into the house to steal the ring and Ricky starts shooting at the cat. Hilarious. When he gets back to Ray's trailer, he swallowed the ring and he's like, "Hi Dad," walks past him and then starts brutally throwing up in the bathroom. Hilarious. Goes to get a bank loan, Ricky, and you know, security ends up getting called because he's being a bit aggressive, and as he's getting pulled out, he's pointing back at the man who should have given him the loan and saying, "That man sexually assaulted me." There's also a really sweet bit. This is one of this subtle humour, okay, in these earlier seasons is what gets me. These first 2 seasons especially, okay, is when Ray, Ricky's dad, is asleep and Ricky tucks a couple of cigs into his hand for when he wakes up, and then he takes one of the cigs back because Ray will never know that he was going to give him that many cigs, right? I also think that the eventual proposal between Ricky and Lucy is really romantic. It's this whole concept of backwards wholesome again, right? The two of them feel like 2 teenagers, okay? Their love feels really pure and young, and there's something that I really love about that, and the fact that it's like nighttime and they're in the back of the car smoking and he's like, "So do you want to like for to be married to me?" Oh, it's just so cute, man. Maybe I'm fucked, but I love episode 5. And my general notes for this season are, you know, there wasn't really any real story to this season, but I don't think it really needed one. Everything kind of built up to the wedding at the end, and of course, if you know this series at all, you know that the boys end up back in jail at the end of every season so that we can have a reset for the beginning of the next season. The reason that they end up in jail is because Julian goes and steals a load of meat for the wedding, and Ricky, who is drunk in the back of the car, ends up stumbling into the store and trying to rescue the guys working in the store from the robbers, but the robbers are Julian. The cops turn up to the wedding and try to arrest Ricky because he was the only one who wasn't wearing a mask on the tapes, and Julian, in this humanizing, wholesome moments that I was talking about earlier, shoots off his gun while the police are there so that he also gets arrested and Ricky won't be going to jail by himself. And it's this moment where he didn't have to do that and he could have gotten away with what he did, but morally he knew that it was the right thing to do because Ricky was getting arrested for his crime. And Ricky wasn't actually the one who did anything wrong. And it's this callback, right, to the fact that Julian blamed Ricky for going to jail in the first place, but how much do you want to bet that it was Julian's fault? I love the comedy and the tragedy of this entire series. Whatever the boys try, it gets messed up and they always end up back where they started. In any other context it would be sad, but because the personalities are so ridiculous and the comedy is so great, we just don't notice it until we really think about it for a second. And I think it's, you know, this element that makes it easy for them to peel back the layers a bit and get really wholesome with us sometimes and make us really feel something in this stupid little comedy show. I really love the toxic relationship between Ricky and Julian. They're so codependent. In episode 1 they agree never to speak again, and then they literally have to save the park. In one episode, Ricky says, "We've got that plutonium kind of love," and you know, he's right. The two of them are so destructive together, but they literally can't live without each other, and it is just perfectly encapsulated in that first episode and this entire first season. The guys are fated to be together, and fate isn't something that you would really expect to see explored in this first season that has like 6 episodes, but it's something that weirdly comes into play quite a lot. It's strange how many big complicated themes are encapsulated in this little mockumentary that we have here. Another thing that you have to note about Trailer Park Boys is that the physical comedy is on point. If Ricky is falling down or fighting Randy or just kind of like doing anything physical, I think that I'm laughing. I will be calling out the physical comedy moments that absolutely make me laugh out loud as we go through the series, just to let you know. Something that's explored even this early on in the series is the parallels between not just Ricky and Randy, which I think is an easy comparison to make, but between Jules and Jim Lahey. I can't believe I just called him Jules already and we're only in the first video. Julian and Jim Lahey, okay, are these really driven guys who are focused on entirely the wrong thing. Julian wants to make money, but he only wants to do it in illegal ways, and Jim literally can't live his life because he's so intently focused on getting rid of these other guys or finding out what it is that they're doing illegal so he can put him back in jail again. That cat and mouse act, okay, is not something that we really see too much of in this early season, but it is hinted at, and it is something that all of us have come to know and love over the course of the series, and so I had to mention it here. Ricky and Randy act as their sidekicks, okay? They're kind of the more stupid, fun-loving side of the duo. They just always kind of get wrapped up in the other guy's schemes because they accept them as the leader, okay? And we actually see Ricky and Randy both go on this journey of like getting respect from their respective partner, for lack of a better word, throughout the course of these early seasons, okay? It's a masterpiece is what I'm trying to tell you about this series, okay? And I don't want any arguments about it, I just want you to shh and listen. One of my favourite episodes that I didn't mention in the notable episodes section, okay, because it's not notable, I just love it, is episode 4. That's the episode with Mrs. Peterson where they're looking after Mrs. Peterson's dog, and also Ricky has Trinity, and Trinity ends up shooting Ricky in the ass with a gun that she finds in the drawer, and then he also gets shot again later on, and this introduces literally the Chekhov's gun concept of this series. If there is a gun in a scene, it's shooting Ricky. It doesn't matter if Ricky's holding the gun, the bullet is going into Ricky somehow. It's actually a good place for me to talk about one of my other favourite things about this series, which is that they do dramatic irony so well. Obviously, if somebody gets a gun out in later seasons, you go, oh for fuck's sake, because you know that Ricky is about to get shot and we're gonna have to go and get patched up again, okay? They do this with a lot of other things throughout the series, like the use of dramatic irony is so good, and I will also be pointing that out to you as we go along. Another thing about Ricky getting shot is the scene where he gets patched up by Sam, and he's like looking into the camera kind of half in pain and half pissed off that Sam's ripping the piss out of him. That like kind of was like a 60th sexual awakening for me in my 20s, and it was the boost that I really needed. I really hope people can tell when I'm joking. I love when Mrs. Peterson rings Julian at the end because her dog eats all of Ricky's pot brownie. It's just this sweet old lady going down the phone. What did you do to this dog? He's all fucked up and silly. It's so stupid. I think to wrap up, this first season is very episodic and almost cartoonish in nature. I have seen Trailer Park Boys compared to Ed and Eddie in the past, and I think that is an apt comparison. However, I think it really was needed and necessary for us to have all of these episodes because it allowed us to get to know the characters, to get to know their dynamics, to get to know the community of the park, and to feel that wholesomeness and that sense of family that they all feel. Think of it as like the first season of Red Dwarf where they're just pissing about on the ship, and we're not going out and doing any mad space adventures with aliens, even though that's presumably what you should be doing in a space show. But it allowed us to get to know the dynamics of the characters and how they relate to each other, so that in later seasons, when they get into situations, there's the dramatic irony of knowing exactly what they're going to say or how they're going to react to a certain situation. That is where the comedy lies. That is why these are such great fucking shows. That's the last thing I'm going to say, okay? So, 2 smokes before I go.